In just 6 months, Tesla deployed over 500 robotaxis across multiple cities, logged nearly 700,000 paid miles, and saw their stock surge 12% in a single week. Meanwhile, Waymo, a company that has been perfecting autonomous vehicles since 2017, has only managed to reach 11 cities after a decade. This is the story of how Tesla is redefining what is possible in autonomous transportation, and it is happening right now. When you talk about disruption in the tech world, you are usually speaking in theoretical terms. You're talking about what could happen, what might happen, what investors believe will happen someday in the future. But the robotaxi revolution is not a future story anymore. It is happening in real time, in real cities, with real people getting into vehicles and trusting their lives to artificial intelligence. Nobody saw it coming quite like this, and that is the remarkable part of what Tesla has accomplished. For years, we have heard promises about autonomous vehicles. Elon Musk has been making bold predictions about self-driving cars for nearly a decade. Every year, he would announce timelines. Every year, those timelines would slip. The skepticism became part of the culture. People would joke about Musk time, about how everything he promised always took twice as long to arrive. But something changed in 2025. Something fundamental shifted in the world of autonomous driving technology. And it was not Waymo making that shift. It was Tesla, and it happened suddenly. In June of 2025, Tesla launched its first robotaxi service in Austin, Texas. This was not a test program anymore. This was not a limited pilot with a handful of vehicles operating in controlled environments. This was an actual commercial service where real customers could request rides in autonomous vehicles that were operating on public streets in a major metropolitan area. The vehicles initially had safety monitors on board, trained drivers who could take control if something went wrong. But that was just the beginning. By December of 2025, only 6 months later, Tesla had removed those safety monitors entirely. For the first time, customers were riding in robotaxis that had zero human intervention. No one was sitting in the driver's seat. No one was hovering over the controls ready to take over. It was just the person in the passenger seat, the artificial intelligence in the road ahead. This is where the story becomes incredible and truly transformative. Because removing the safety monitors was not just symbolic, it was operational. It meant Tesla had achieved something that the entire industry thought was still years away. It meant the company had the confidence and presumably the data to back it up that their self-driving system could operate without any human oversight whatsoever. The confidence came from somewhere concrete. It came from data. It came from testing. It came from miles and miles of real-world driving that had taught the system how to handle the unpredictable nature of human traffic, pedestrians, cyclists, weather conditions, and edge cases. By April of 2026, just 4 months into that year, Tesla achieved another major milestone that shocked the entire industry. The company launched fully autonomous robotaxi services in Dallas and Houston, Texas. And this launch came with a fleet of 573 vehicles. Not 50 vehicles, not 100 vehicles, 573 operating vehicles. In the span of 10 months, from June of 2025 to April of 2026, Tesla had grown its robotaxi fleet from 0 to over 500 vehicles operating across multiple major cities simultaneously. The market reacted instantly and decisively to this announcement. Tesla stock surged 12% in a single week, leading up to the Dallas-Houston announcement. Investors understood what was happening on a fundamental level. This was not gradual progress anymore. This was acceleration at an unprecedented pace. This was the moment when Tesla moved from being a company with ambitious plans to being a company that was actually executing those plans at a scale and speed that nobody had achieved before in this industry. But Dallas and Houston were just the beginning of something much larger. Because even as those cities were coming online and serving thousands of customers, Tesla was already planning the next wave of expansion. By mid-2026, the company had announced plans to bring robotaxi services to Phoenix, Miami, Orlando, Tampa, and Las Vegas. 7 cities total by the middle of the year. Some analysts thought Tesla would hit 5 or 6 of those targets, but the company was moving so fast that even their own aggressive timelines were becoming conservative estimates. Let us stop for a moment and think about what this actually means in practical terms. Think about the geography involved. Think about the logistics required. Think about everything necessary to launch a robotaxi service in a new city from scratch. You need to get regulatory approval from the state and local governments. You need to map the streets in unprecedented detail. You need to train your artificial intelligence on the specific road conditions, the specific traffic patterns, the specific challenges of that particular city and region. You need to hire and train staff for customer service. You need to set up customer support infrastructure and call centers. You need to handle insurance, liability, and all of the complex legal and regulatory requirements that come with operating autonomous vehicles. Waymo has been doing this for a decade. They have had a full decade to figure out the playbook and get it right. And they have done it well and successfully. By March of 2026, Waymo had reached 11 cities in the greater San Francisco Bay Area. 11 cities after 10 years of continuous work and investment. That is an average of about 1.1 cities per year. But Tesla was moving at a completely different pace and scale. Tesla was launching 3, 4, sometimes 5 cities per month. Tesla was doing in months what Waymo was doing in years. This speed differential was not going unnoticed by investors, competitors, or industry analysts. How was this possible for Tesla to move so rapidly? The answer is software and scale and data. Tesla had a fundamental advantage that Waymo did not possess. Tesla had millions of vehicles on the road already. Every Tesla vehicle that had full self-driving capabilities was continuously gathering data 24/7. Every drive, every trip, every road condition was being recorded, analyzed, and fed into neural networks that were learning how to drive better. This was not a robotaxi company that happened to own some cars. This was a car company that had turned its entire fleet into a massive data collection engine for autonomous driving technology. Waymo had taken a different approach to the problem. Waymo had built specialized autonomous vehicles. Waymo had been more cautious about deployment. Waymo had prioritized safety over speed of deployment, and those were good decisions from a certain perspective. But they came with a cost, and that cost was speed. That cost was market share. That cost was the chance to set the standard before the competition arrived at full scale. By mid-2026, Tesla's robotaxi fleet had grown so rapidly that the company announced it was doubling roughly every month, doubling every single month. Think about what that trajectory and growth rate means for the future. If you double every month, you go from 500 vehicles to 1,000 in 1 month, 2,000 in 2 months, 4,000 in 3 months. At that rate of growth, Tesla could have tens of thousands of robotaxis on the road by the end of 2026. That kind of exponential growth was unprecedented in the autonomous vehicle space. And the business model was remarkably simple and compelling. Customers would call up the Tesla app on their phone, request a ride like they would with Uber, and a robotaxi would arrive within minutes. The cost would be approximately 20 cents per mile on average. That is significantly cheaper than traditional rideshare services like Uber and Lyft, which typically charge more than $1 per mile depending on surge pricing and other factors. This was not just a better technology. This was better economics. This was a service that could potentially undercut the entire existing rideshare industry on price while still being profitable for Tesla. By July of 2026, Tesla had reached 4 cities with unsupervised robotaxis operating without any safety monitors. Austin, which was the original and flagship market. Dallas and Houston in Texas, which were launched together, and Miami in Florida, which was their entry point into the Southeast. The company had also expanded to Orlando and Tampa in Florida during that same month. That is 6 cities with active robotaxi services running continuously. And remember, this entire expansion happened within about 18 months from the original launch in June of 2025. The robotaxis themselves had accumulated impressive numbers, nearly 700,000 paid miles, 700,000 miles that actual customers had ridden in fully autonomous vehicles, 700,000 miles of real-world data that was feeding back into Tesla's machine learning systems, 700,000 miles that represented everything from normal traffic to edge cases to unusual scenarios. All of that data was making the system better and more capable. But here is where the story gets more complicated and interesting. Because while Tesla was moving fast and deploying aggressively, there were signs that the growth might not be as dramatic as some of the headlines suggested. When you look at the actual numbers on a quarter-by-quarter basis, the growth in paid miles was not what you might expect from a company that was supposed to be disrupting the entire transportation industry fundamentally. In the first quarter of 2026, Tesla logged about 900,000 paid miles with their robotaxis. In the second quarter of 2026, they logged about 900,000 paid miles again. The numbers were essentially flat from quarter to quarter. This raised some important questions for analysts and investors. If the fleet was doubling every month, why were the miles not increasing significantly quarter over quarter? The answer was logistics and geographic deployment strategy. Tesla was spreading their vehicles across more cities, which meant fewer vehicles per city, which meant fewer total miles per quarter, even as the fleet size increased numerically. But it also suggested that the robotaxis had not yet achieved the kind of adoption rate per vehicle that would truly disrupt the market dramatically. There was another complication too, and it was serious: safety performance. Detailed safety data showed that Tesla's supervised robotaxi fleet was averaging a crash every 57,000 miles. To put that in perspective, human drivers average a crash roughly every 200,000 miles based on insurance and accident data. That meant Tesla's robotaxis were crashing at about 4 times the rate of human drivers. This was for the supervised fleet, before the safety monitors were removed from vehicles. Presumably, the unsupervised fleet was safer and more cautious, since only vehicles that demonstrated sufficient safety were allowed to operate without a monitor. But the data made clear that Tesla's system still had room for improvement and development. This reality did not stop the company, though, and it did not stop the expansion. Tesla and Elon Musk continued with their aggressive expansion plans unabated. The reason was simple and grounded. Even at higher crash rates than human drivers, the technology was improving. Every crash taught the neural network something valuable. Every edge case that occurred on the road was captured and analyzed. The system was learning in real time. And more importantly, the direction was clear. The crash rate was trending down over time. The safety was improving gradually. It was just a matter of time before autonomous vehicles became as safe or safer than human drivers. Meanwhile, there was another major development happening in the robotaxi space that was reshaping the competitive landscape significantly. Uber, which had been primarily a rideshare platform for years, was ramping up its own robotaxi ambitions dramatically and strategically. Uber announced plans to invest over $10 billion in autonomous vehicle development and deployment across multiple markets. This was not a side project or minor initiative for Uber. This was a major strategic bet for the company and its future, because Uber understood what Tesla understood and what everyone in the industry understood fundamentally. Whoever controlled the robotaxi market in the coming decade would control a massive portion of the entire transportation industry and could set prices and standards for everyone. This was not just about technology anymore. This was about market dominance and economic power. But Uber was not the only player worth watching in this competitive race. General Motors had Cruise, their own autonomous vehicle subsidiary that had been working on self-driving technology, but Cruise had faced some setbacks and regulatory challenges that slowed their progress. Waymo, backed by Alphabet and Google, continued to expand methodically and carefully. And there were startups and other players entering the space and raising capital. The robotaxi market was no longer theoretical. It was real, it was competitive, and it was moving fast. Then in October of 2025, before the main commercial rollout that we have been discussing throughout this narrative, Elon Musk had unveiled Tesla's next-generation robotaxi called the Cybercab. This was a purpose-built autonomous vehicle designed from the ground up for robotic taxi service. It was a two-seater with no steering wheel and no pedals. No way for a human to take control because there was no human control interface possible. The design was sleek and futuristic, with stainless steel construction and an overall aesthetic that looked like nothing else on the road today. The Cybercab was designed to cost less than $30,000, making it dramatically cheaper than most vehicles on the road today, and potentially most future vehicles. Production of the Cybercab began in April of 2026 at Tesla's Giga, Texas facility. But production was slow initially, as Musk had warned investors it would be. He used the term S-curve to describe the manufacturing ramp. Initial production would be slow and gradual, but then would accelerate exponentially toward the end of the year. Musk cautioned that material revenue from the Cybercab would likely not arrive until 2027, but he indicated that production volume could increase significantly in late 2026. The Cybercab represented something important and symbolic. It was not just Tesla adapting existing car models to robotaxi service. It was Tesla building a vehicle from the ground up for autonomous driving, a vehicle optimized for the specific requirements and operational demands of robotaxi operation, a vehicle that could be manufactured at scale and deployed across the country. The Cybercab was Tesla's answer to the question of how to build a robotaxi business that could actually make real money at scale. But there were questions and concerns. There were always questions about execution. The regulatory environment was uncertain and changing. Autonomous vehicles still required approval from state and local governments. In California, Tesla was operating robotaxis with human drivers in the San Francisco Bay Area, not truly autonomous vehicles, because they had not yet been granted the regulatory permission to operate fully autonomous vehicles without any safety driver. In other states, the regulatory landscape was different. In Texas, Tesla had more freedom to operate and experiment, but nationwide standardization was still years away from being achieved. There was also the important question of consumer adoption and long-term demand. Yes, people were using the robotaxis in Austin and Dallas and Houston and Miami and Orlando and Tampa, but were they using them primarily because they preferred autonomous vehicles, or because they were cheaper than competitors, or because they were novel and interesting as a new technology? Would adoption remain strong as the novelty wore off over time? Would people feel comfortable getting into a car with no driver, no steering wheel, no way for a human to take control if something went wrong? These were not trivial questions about the market. The answer from the people actually using the service seemed to be yes, they would use them. Customer feedback was generally positive and encouraging. People appreciated the lower cost compared to Uber and Lyft. People appreciated the safety features that came with the vehicle, like the fact that every ride was recorded, every decision made by the AI was logged and could be reviewed. People seemed to trust the technology more than the cynics and skeptics suggested they would. And then there was the artificial intelligence itself at the heart of all this. Tesla's full self-driving system was the core technology behind the robotaxis and everything else. The system was trained on real-world driving data from millions of Tesla vehicles worldwide. The system used neural networks and deep learning to make driving decisions. The system was not pre-programmed with traditional rules and algorithms. It was not using conventional autonomous vehicle approaches with expensive LiDAR sensors and complex rule-based systems. It was using pure vision-based AI, cameras, and neural networks, trained on massive amounts of real-world driving data. This approach had advantages and disadvantages worth considering. The advantage was that it could scale dramatically. Camera systems are cheap, they're easy to install, they're easy to improve through software updates that can be pushed to every vehicle remotely. The disadvantage was that it required huge amounts of data for training. It required a way to gather training data continuously from the road. It required a way to deploy improvements across your entire fleet quickly. Tesla had all of those capabilities. Tesla was optimized for exactly this kind of operation and this type of scaling. Critics pointed out that Tesla's approach was fundamentally different from Waymo's proven approach. Waymo used LiDAR extensively, which provided precise three-dimensional mapping of the environment. LiDAR could measure exact distances to objects with precision. LiDAR could create detailed environmental models, but LiDAR was expensive. LiDAR added weight and complexity. LiDAR did not scale the way camera systems scaled. Tesla believed that pure vision could achieve the same level of performance if trained well enough, and their robotaxi results suggested they might be right about that bet. There were other companies, too, with different approaches. Cruise, which we mentioned earlier, was using a different approach to the problem. Various startups were working on autonomous vehicle technology with different architectures. But by mid-2026, the race seemed to be between Tesla and Waymo, with everyone else playing catch-up in second place. The market implications were absolutely staggering. The transportation industry is massive and represents hundreds of billions of dollars globally. Hundreds of billions of dollars flow through rideshare services, taxi services, delivery services, and all of the ancillary businesses that support transportation. If Tesla could dominate the robotaxi market the way they had dominated the electric vehicle market, it would be one of the greatest wealth creation stories in business history. Musk had suggested that autonomous vehicles could add trillions of dollars to Tesla's market capitalization over time. That might sound like hyperbole at first, but the numbers actually supported it when you ran the math. The addressable market was that large. But there were risks, too, that could derail the entire story. Regulatory crackdowns were always possible if accidents occurred. A major accident could turn public sentiment against autonomous vehicles overnight. Competitors could catch up faster than expected using different technology. The technology might hit unforeseen limitations at scale. The economics might not work out the way everyone expected. There were 1,000 ways the robotaxi story could go wrong. Yet by the summer of 2026, Tesla had already achieved something remarkable and undeniable. The company had moved from vaporware to actual commercial service that was profitable. They had deployed hundreds of vehicles. They had served thousands or tens of thousands of customers. They had demonstrated that robotaxi service could actually work at a commercial scale. They had shown that autonomous vehicles were not just possible, they were viable and profitable. This brought us to where we are now in August of 2026. Tesla is operating robotaxis in multiple cities daily. The company is planning further expansion to new cities. The company is ramping up Cybercab production toward volume. The company is training their neural networks on hundreds of thousands of miles of real-world data weekly. The company is moving faster than anyone thought possible. Waymo, which had been the presumed leader in autonomous vehicles and industry leader, had lost the narrative and momentum. Waymo was still operating well technically. Waymo had achieved impressive technical accomplishments. Waymo had been more cautious and deliberate in their approach, but Waymo had lost the sense of momentum. Tesla was the story that everyone talked about. Tesla was the company disrupting the market. Tesla was the company that everyone was watching and reporting on. The ride-hailing industry looked at Tesla and saw the future arriving faster than anyone expected. Uber was investing billions in robotaxis. Lyft was watching the market carefully. Traditional taxi companies were facing a potential obsolescence. The entire transportation landscape was about to shift in fundamental ways. Workers who drove for rideshare services faced an uncertain future. As robotaxis became more prevalent, fewer human drivers would be needed over time. This would reduce costs for consumers, which was good for consumers, but it would displace workers, which was bad for those workers. The industry would need to manage that transition carefully and thoughtfully. Investors who had believed in Tesla's vision, who had bought the stock despite years of missed deadlines and overpromised features, were finally seeing their faith rewarded handsomely. Tesla stock had surged on the robotaxi announcements. The market had repriced Tesla to reflect the potential of this massive new business opportunity. The regulatory environment was still evolving rapidly. Different states had different rules and frameworks. Different cities had different requirements and timelines. There was no national standard yet for autonomous vehicles, but gradually, the regulatory framework was falling into place. Agencies were writing rules. Testing programs were expanding. The path toward widespread autonomous vehicle deployment was becoming clearer. Insurance companies were grappling with an entirely new reality. How do you insure a vehicle with no driver? Who is liable if an accident occurs? These were not trivial questions, but the insurance industry was adapting. New insurance products were being developed specifically for autonomous vehicles. The legal framework was emerging quickly. Technology companies outside the automotive space were also paying close attention. This was not just about cars anymore. This was about artificial intelligence. This was about machine learning at scale. This was about the kinds of problems that could be solved with massive amounts of data and neural networks. Tesla's Robotaxi success was a data point in a much larger story about the power and potential of AI. And yet, despite all of this remarkable progress, Tesla was still cautious about near-term expectations. Musk had indicated that material revenue from the Cybercab would not arrive until 2027 at the earliest. The company was not yet claiming that robotaxis would be a massive profit driver in 2026 alone. They were treating it as a long-term opportunity, a business that would grow significantly over time. But the trajectory was absolutely clear. The direction was obvious. The future was coming into focus. In the span of just 18 months, Tesla had moved the needle from theoretical to operational. They had deployed hundreds of vehicles. They had served hundreds of thousands of miles. They had proven that the business model could work. They had started the process of disrupting an entire industry fundamentally. Meanwhile, other companies were scrambling to catch up urgently. Waymo was expanding methodically. Cruise was dealing with regulatory challenges. Startups were racing to raise capital and develop their own systems. Uber was betting billions of dollars. The competitive landscape was intensifying rapidly. But Tesla had advantages that were hard to overcome and difficult for competitors to match. They had the data from their existing vehicle fleet worldwide. They had the manufacturing expertise and experience. They had the brand recognition among consumers globally. They had the momentum. They had already proven they could execute at scale successfully. Tesla was in the driver's seat of this future, and they were moving forward with confidence and speed. The company had proven that their approach could work where others had failed. The data showed results. The customer adoption was real. The expansion was happening. Nothing could stop this momentum now. The robotaxi market was going to be one of the defining stories of the next decade. It was going to reshape cities and transportation patterns fundamentally. It was going to create new categories of jobs and eliminate others from the market. It was going to change how people moved around and lived their lives daily. And Tesla, against expectations and after years of delays and broken promises, had positioned themselves to lead that transformation moving forward. In just 6 months, they had deployed 500 robotaxis across multiple cities, logged hundreds of thousands of paid miles, and proven that autonomous vehicles were not a distant future concept. They were here. They were real. They were operating on public streets right now, and the revolution was only beginning to accelerate rapidly. Looking ahead to the remainder of 2026 and beyond, Tesla's roadmap appeared ambitious. The company was planning to expand to additional cities beyond the initial 7 announced. They were ramping up Cybercab production significantly. They were continuously improving their full self-driving software through updates. They were gathering more data from their expanding fleet to refine and perfect their systems. For investors, this represented an enormous opportunity. For consumers, it meant lower transportation costs and new conveniences. For the industry, it represented existential competition. For workers, it meant a period of significant transition. For society overall, it meant rethinking fundamentally how cities were designed, how transportation worked, and how people lived and worked in the future. This was bigger than just one company or one technology.